It's Rolling Rat Superstar here. Yay! Now then, before this video starts, did you ever buy this record? Come on, bring it up. Yeah, that's my album, Rolling Rat Superstar, the cassette of the album. Yeah! It was the greatest album of 1984 by miles. Yeah! And now, anyway, back to, what's your name? Yeah, him. Yeah! Sit there, be quiet. Hello once again, it's Matthew from MatthewNorthMusic here, and once again, thank you for watching this video. And if you like the kind of content I make, please think about hitting the subscribe button, and also if you click the little bell icon, then you'll be notified of the next videos that are going to be released. Now, just so you know, there's no charge for this. I know sometimes you might think subscribing means you've got to pay for something, but no, everything's absolutely free on this channel. And also, if you hit the like button, if you like this content, then that helps the videos kind of get noticed a bit more. And as I recently had a video that was extremely successful, you know, it'd be nice to maybe replicate it, especially about this subject, which is 1984, the greatest year in pop, ? And what have we got in March 1984? Well, there was quite a few major releases this month, and there was a lot of other good stuff going on. As I said, with this kind of thing I'm doing, I'm not covering every aspect because there's so much stuff went on, you know, tours, albums, etc. But with the help of, you know, some old smash hits, some old record mirrors, we can kind of just go through, you know, what was kind of happening at the time. And so I'm going to look at the first week of 1984 March. And as far as single releases are concerned, well, there were some real big hits came out in this month. We had Hello by Lionel Richie, which eventually went up to #1 for what seemed like months. Rebel Yell by Billy Idol hit the charts. I think it was the first time it was released, but I think after White Wedding later in the year, it got re-released and it became a bigger hit. But its first release anyway was this month. There were a couple of other singles like What Do I Do by Phil Fearon Galaxy, if you remember that one. Not a massive hit, but it was a great song. And even King Crimson released a single in this week, a song called Sleepless. But as for albums, well, there were two major album releases this week. This one, The Works by Queen, which turned Queen back into being a super big mega band again, because the previous album, Hot Spaces, didn't do that well. Even though one of the singles, Las Palabras de Amor, did all right, and that came off the back of Under Pressure, which they did with David Bowie. But I remember vividly when Radio Gaga came out, as many people do, and the video and the whole, all of that. And people just went mad for Queen again. And I think the Greatest Hits album went back into the album charts as well. And I think a couple of the earlier albums also ended up getting back in the album charts. But The Works is an absolute mega album of 1984, and it did brilliantly. And you look at the track listings, you know, Radio Gaga, Tear It Up, It's a Hard Life, Man on the Prowl, all great songs. Song side 2, Machines Back to Humans, a little bit of a filler, that one. Once Break Free, classic song. Keep Passing the Open Window, again, another sort of filler track, but it's a good tune. But then Hammer to Fall, and then the classic Is This the World We Created? You know, absolutely top album. And also in this week came this, the debut album from Nick Kershaw, Human Racing. Now, this was actually the first of 2 albums that Nick Kershaw put out in this year. But you know, with things like Wouldn't It Be Good and Won't Let the Sun Go Down on Me cementing Kershaw as a top artist, you know, again, this album went on to sell huge numbers of records, and don't think it ever got to #1 in the album charts, but obviously if it came out now, it would have been #1 for weeks. But yeah, two big albums. Now, as far as what was on the telly, if you'd watched The Tube, you would have seen live sets from Bananarama and Thomas Dolby. Whistle Test this week had a feature all about synthesizers. They were kind of doing a thing where they were looking at different instruments and what the technology was bringing about. And this was quite an interesting piece because they had Steve Levine talking about the Fairlight. Now, if you don't know what the Fairlight is, It's one of the first what we call samplers, which basically takes a sound and manipulates it. And 1984 was a pivotal point in this technology, particularly in the UK, with artists like The Art of Noise and basically everything Trevor Horn was doing, because they were using samples and putting them into everything. It started the year before with things like Owner of a Lonely Heart by Yes that Trevor Horn produced, that had tons of samples in there that J.J. Jeselnik put together. And it carried on, and everyone started buying Fairlights, Thomas Dolby, Kate Bush, Peter Gabriel, and it was the new toy in town, and everybody got one. And they cost about £30,000, which was, back then, you certainly could buy a flat in London for that. You might, and on the outskirts, you could probably buy a house.
We've got in this bucket here various pieces of glass, and I have a perfectly ordinary house brick, which I'm about to fling in here, and we'll record it.
Right,
Got that?
recorded that.
That actually is the shape of the note.
That's the wave shape as
Yeah,
it's stored in
yeah.
the memory, yes. And to play that back, we just hit any key on it. And of course you can go up the octave.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm dying to have a go. Do you
Yes,
mind?
indeed.
Now, if you watch the Oxford Roadshow on this week, you would have seen a feature about a channel called Music Box, which was a cable channel that just started up. And I think a little bit earlier on, Whistle Test did a similar feature. Now, Music Box was a cable channel, and it was kind of a forerunner to MTV, and you could only get it in certain places. And I remember seeing it in Kent because my gran had it in Chatham. And it was like an MTV thing. You had a presenter and they played loads of music videos, and sometimes you got live clips and stuff as well. Very embryonic. Not many people saw it, but it was the start. And obviously video started to become more and more important in this decade. Well, it was the decade of the video. As saying, in America you had MTV, and then in the UK, as well as Top of the Pops and other shows that showed videos, you had these cable channels, which I said, where I lived in the southwest, you didn't see it, but in the southeast, and I think in parts of the Midlands, you did get to see these channels. So that was a pretty new thing. Now, also on the Oxford Roadshow, you had a live performance from Dead or Alive. This was after Wayne Hussey had left the band, and there was an interview with Green Gartside from Scritti Politti, and there was a feature of Roger Daltrey as well. So plenty to watch in that week. Now, let's take a little look at what we kind of could read in the music papers. Here's the record mirror of this week, and Tom Bailey's on the cover because Into the Gap had just come out and they were pretty massive. We look at the news feature. There's a feature here about The Cure going out on their first tour for 2 years, talking about the last time they played was the Elephant Fair in St Germans in Cornwall, which is actually not that far from where I live. And that was the then new lineup of The Cure, which had Andy Anderson on drums. Paul Thompson had just rejoined the band on guitar and sax and keyboards, and Phil Thornalley on bass. Of course, Phil was the engineer on a number of Cure records, as well as albums by the Thompson Twins, and he's still creating a lot of music today. And there's a feature there on Reflex. The Weather Girls are announcing that they're going to have a new single called It's Raining Men, obviously another mega big song from 1984, although originally came out in 1982 in America. Now we've got single reviews here done by Phil Fearon from Galaxy, and actually a lot of the songs here, actually, none of them became, big hits. I mean, you've got, I suppose the nearest thing's probably African Bambaata's Renegade of Funk, which he says, I can imagine this pumping through the really heavy speakers in the right environment and it'll go down the storm. I personally don't really understand 90% of electronic music. Some of it is like Planet Rock, but most of it I don't get into. This is too unfeeling, too electronic. I doubt it could be a pop hit. Well, these African Bambaataa records were produced a lot by Arthur Baker, who went on to become one of the great remix producers ever. And again, that was using a lot of this new technology and samplers and things. So it's kind of the start of the, hip hop and all that sort of thing. There's a review here of a Kajagoogoo single that never went anywhere. What does he say about China Crisis? There's a song called Hannah Hannah, which I don't think was a hit. This sounds like The Cure. The voice is really Robert Smith. I'd never have guessed it was China Crisis. Well, I don't think Gary really does sound like Robert Smith, but he might have done on this song. I really enjoyed listening to it. It's a bit flat. I was just beginning to get into a bit bored with the middle 8 came in, which was quite melodic, and picked up Hit Potential, Another Grower. There you go. Now in the letters page, there's the usual sort of stuff. There's someone talking about the fact that why do people not like modern romance, and there's someone saying that Frankie Goes to Hollywood should be banned forever because of the Relax record. But someone here is actually commenting about a Paul Gambaccini programme on Channel 4 called The Other Side of the Tracks. And in this episode, Depeche Mode were on, and they were talking about Everything Counts, and one of them was playing an oboe, and this person seemed offended that someone's there with a real instrument, and when really it's a synthesizer, and they say, you know, they don't like synthesizers, they want to hear real instruments. Well, that's the gist of the comment anyway. And then we're talking about star style of this week, and to be honest, he's wearing clothes that you could probably get away with wearing today, to be honest, with his slightly mullet-esque haircut. So we're going now into the second week of March 1984. Quite a few big singles came out. Lucky Star by Madonna entered the charts number 47. Borrowed Time by John Lennon entered at 51. And Borrowed Time is also the name of a new John Lennon documentary that's coming out later this year, directed by Alan G. Parker. So that's definitely going to be something worth seeing. Dr. Mabuse by Propaganda entered the charts at number 66. Number 68, The Special AKA, or The Specials, but they call themselves The Special AKA for this record. Their Nelson Mandela song came out into position 68. Obviously that was a big hit. And then That's the Way I Like It by Dead or Alive entered the charts at 79. Again, that went on to become a minor hit. But Jessie's Girl by Rick Springfield, that was a song that was massive in America. Did quite well in the UK. That entered the charts at 85. Now, as for albums, well, one great classic is this, Humans Lib by Howard Jones. Now, that entered the album charts at number 1, and rightly so, because it's an absolutely brilliant, brilliant record. But at 21, this entered the charts, which is the second solo album from David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. Now, 1984, all the members of Pink Floyd put records out. Richard Wright had an album called Z with the guy from Fashion, Z Identity, that came out in 84. Roger Waters had the Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, and Nick Mason had the Fictitious Sports album, which was recorded earlier. But I think it came out in 84. Actually, it might not have done. It might have come out earlier. But anyway, 3 of the 4 definitely had records out that year. Also, Swoon by Peter Barb Sprout, that came out and entered the charts at number 22. Now, on the TV, if you'd watched The Tube, you would have seen a feature about Duran Duran in France, and you'd also seen the German industrial band Einsturzen Neubauten, which I probably pronounced wrong. Still a very popular band today. There's also a feature on Elvis Costello. Now, if we flick over to the Oxford Road show, there's a live performance from Bronski Beat, true live performance. There's a feature with Billy Bragg, and Nick Kershaw also played live. Now, on Whistle Test, Howard Jones did a live performance, and we're just going to look at the introduction from Mark Ellen.
There, kind of fly on the wall in an A&R office at a record company, and witness some of the scenes. If you imagine 6 months ago, somebody must have gone into Warner Brothers with a tape clutched probably firmly in their clammy little hand and said they had the saviour of pop music. He used to be in a classical rock band called Skin Tight.
It's perfect credentials.
It is, yes. He's gone solo, and he's now really, really big in High Wycombe. And they must have said, you know, well, obviously he must have some really stunning visual act or something. He said, yes, you know, what happens? He gets up on stage, just him and his synthesizer, and then his mate gets out of the audience, covers his face with flour, dresses himself up in chains and sort of noodles about, you know, waves his arms and things. And they must have said, well, he must have some really charismatic name. Is he called, you know, David Lee Roth or Sting, you know?
Or Dirk Thrust or
Doug Biceps or something like that. He said, and they would have turned to them and said, better still, he's called Howard Jones. And yet they signed him. And they must have obviously listened to the tape. Anyway, he's here in the studio tonight with his friend Jed Hoyle. He's going to play 2 songs, and the first of these is called Equality.
And also on that episode, we had the Australian band Mental as Anything Later on, they had their big hit, "Give It Up," which was in the Crocodile Dundee film. And there's also a feature that Richard Skinner did where he's talking about the band Style Council, who we will mention in a minute. So, yeah, lots of good stuff on the telly. Now, if we look at the third week, then quite a few big hits came out in the charts this week. Number 14, we had Culture Club's "It's a Miracle." Number 22, "A Love Worth Waiting For" by Shakin' Stevens. Number 29, new entry was "People Are People" by Depeche Mode. Number 36, "Up on the Catwalk" by Simple Minds. Number 69, "Time After Time" by Cyndi Lauper. Number 72, we had "Glad It's All Over" by Captain Sensible. So all of those songs went up the charts. Yes also had a single out this week, "Leave It," which was off their 90125 album. Wasn't as big, obviously, as "Owner of a Lonely Heart," but it's still a great record. Now, as for albums, if you're into the kind of the jazzier side of the world, "Domino Theory" by Weather Report came out this week. But in our pop world, which is what I'm mostly talking about on this came out, Dire Straits' "Alchemy." As far as I'm concerned, this is the greatest live album ever made. There's no overdubs, there's no corrections, it's as they played, and the performance is exceptional. The songs are fantastic, and very recently they've brought out a box set where they've actually got the complete Alchemy concert. Well, complete apart from a few bits of chit-chat taken out, but that's just recently come out, and certainly if you like Dire Straits, the live box set's well worth getting. Now, the debut album as well from the Style Council, "Café Bleu," came out this week. A bit of a mixed album, really. It's a real mash-up of different styles, and you know, and it's not full of. It's got one of the singles is on it, but you know, it's got jazz on it. It's got bits of hip hop. It's got all sorts, and I really like it. I think it's a great record, as is their follow-up, "Our Favourite Shop." Now, if I dig out a CD, because I don't have this on vinyl, but I do have my original CD, and it's actually one of the first CDs I bought, "Fugazi" by Marillion. This came out in this week, and I think this is an absolute classic of the modern prog rock genre. You know, it's just a great album. And also, if you like Marillion, if you can get it, it's well worth getting the deluxe box set that came out a couple of years ago, because there's a new mix and a bunch of live stuff and a really good documentary. But Fugazi for me is a really great record. Now, on the telly, we had Howard Jones and the Smiths on the Tube, as well as Madness, the Weather Girls, and Spitting Image were on there as well. And Spitting Image was a very iconic TV programme of the era, and everybody watched it, because Sunday evenings in England in the 80s were boring. Apart from listening to the Top 40 and Annie Nightingale on the radio, there wasn't a lot to do. You know, you might want to watch That's Life, but that's about it. But then Spitting Image came on, so 10 o'clock, everybody watched it, and it was definitely the highlight of a Sunday evening, other than what was on the radio. Now, on Whistle Test, we had a clip of Marillion from Sight and Sound in concert, which I'll talk about in a minute. And there was a feature about Japanese music. There was an interview with Mark Knopfler talking about Alchemy. And there was a band called Swan's Way play on. But Mark Ellen, again, he doesn't like Milk and Honey by John Lennon, and makes a point of it. And if you remember, we mentioned that in the Smash Hits review of it when it came out, sort of 2 months previous. Now, on the Oxford Road show, you had a live performance from Sade. Bananarama were on. They did a feature about Red Bus Studios and talking about the EMS digital delay line.
So is this purely for vocals then?
It can be used for anything. I mean, anything that you want to put in it, you can store. So, I mean, if you want to put something in it, we'll demonstrate how it works.
Well, hold on, where's the tape that it goes onto?
There's no tape, it's just all inside the box digitally.
There is tape. Ooh. No, there's just a few plugs and things. So it's all...
Yeah, so if you speak a sentence into it, and then
Okay.
we'll lock it in.
Okay, well, that's nearly it for this show. We'll be back next week at 7:05.
Right, now we'll edit that back.
That's nearly it for this show. We'll be back next week at 7:05.
Now if we wanted to take the front off of that,
What have you got?
Okay, well that's nearly it for this show. We'll be back next week.
And then there's also an interview with John Moss from Culture Club, and there's a band called Briar, who are a heavy metal band. They're on there as well. So plenty to watch on the telly. And we'll have a quick flick through those 2 weeks' worth of Record Mirrors. On the second week, we've got Martin Gore on the cover of Record Mirror, and look here, any 250 albums you'd love at any price now, an incredible price of £2.69. So, and that was about half what a normal album was. Most albums were around about the £5 mark. Now, what's in the news section? There's a bit about the Kinks. Depeche Mode are back in action again. Well, we know that because they're on the front cover. Hazy Fantasy have split up. There you go. It says it here. Hazy Fantasy split up. Let's have a look at the letters page and what are they talking about here? Many people say the groups such as Duran Duran, Culture Club, Spandau Ballet and Wham will always have chart hits because of who they are and not what they are. From 1978 to 81, who would not have said the same about the Boomtown Rats? Every record they released was a chart success, even Diamond Smiles and The Elephant's Graveyard. The worst record they ever released. Yet I noticed in Gallup's charts the latest offering tonight has slipped from 73 to 76 to 83, even though they have performed on the single 5 times on TV, Oxford Roadshow, Grossel Test, Razzmatazz, Saturday Superstar, Sight Sound and Concert. By now it should be top 5, but you and your other mags give little help in accomplishing bands such as the Rats. I only hope the same happens to Duran one day, John Law, Wolverhampton, and so say all of us. Well, of course, that kind of happened, didn't it? Because Duran Duran did ultimately start not having hit records. And some of those songs they put out that weren't hits were great records. But then they came back and did have big records. But it's interesting here, someone's flying the flag for the Boomtown Rats. But of course, ultimately, Bob Geldof would go on to be involved in producing not just the biggest record of the year, but at the time, the biggest record ever. And so we're going to go to the next one. So this should be March the 17th. Alexis Sales on the front cover. And of course, his single, Hello John, Got a New Motor, had not been out that long. And Thompson Twins are bringing out a new single, You Take Me Up. Yep, they certainly will be. An advert for the Style Council there. And various little features. Oh, there's a nice advert there for a Sharp boombox in lovely yellow. And pause for thought. We're not Puritan, say Kajagoogoo. So this is the post-Lamal lineup of Kajagoogoo. And Boots have got all the albums there. People forget Boots the Chemist were a big retailer of records, and people used to buy them from anywhere, but particularly places like Boots the Chemist. So Roy Hay from Culture Club is reviewing the singles. So we're just going to pick a few at random. Let's have a look at, say, Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time, which went on to become an absolute classic. I don't like her very much. She was in LA doing the Grammy presentation to us via satellite link, and I nearly fell off my stool when she came on the telly. I couldn't believe it was her. My God, I think she's so overrated. Girls Just Want to Have Fun was obviously a brilliant pop song, but had no appeal whatsoever. It's bloody awful. When I hear Girls, I thought that the Americans caught onto the pop thing. They'll do it well, but this I hate. So yeah, claws are definitely out on that one. Now let's see what he says about Leave It by Yes. And he says, I loved Owner of a Lonely Heart. Still can't believe we knocked it off the #1 spot in America because it was such a brilliant record. The production on this is obviously astounding as usual. Mr. Horn at his best. I grew up a big fan of Yes, and apart from the absence of Steve Howe, they're exactly the same as when I used to listen to them. I think it's great that they come back with this one, with this new production thing. This is as good as Owner, but still interesting. Isn't as good as Owner, but still interesting. Better than the average run-of-the-mill records these days. Won't be a hit, though. Well, he was right. It wasn't a hit. But it was interesting how he hated Cyndi Lauper, but he liked Yes. Let's have a look at Fiat Lux's Blue Emotion. Because if you don't know who Fiat Lux are, they're a really great band that were never massive, But the great thing about them is they're still around today. And they had a single called Blue Emotion, and it says, "I just knew how this was going to sound by looking at the cover. I just don't know what to say about this sort of record. It's like there's no musical talent, so they're trying to bluff there is. There's no concept of music. It's basic study of rhythms and melodies and nothing else. I can't listen to stuff like this anymore." Well, you know, Roy, you can say what you like, but minimalist electronic music has its place, and it's still very, very popular. Now, here's something. Now, I was probably a little bit dismissive of it in my last video, but breakdancing was indeed a big thing. And here you've got your own cut out and keep guide on how to do breakdancing. Now, I don't think you'd be allowed to print this now with health and safety in mind, but I mean, if anybody of my age can do any of these moves, then I think you're an extremely lucky person. Now, I'm only really covering new releases on these films, but we'll just look at the actual what's in the album charts on this week. And obviously, Howard Jones's Humans Live went into #1, Into the Gap by the Thompson Twins #2, Innocent Man by Billy Joel #3, Thriller by Michael Jackson #4, The Works by Queen #5, The Smiths' Debut #6, Can't Slow Down by Lionel Richie 7, Touch by the Eurythmics #8, Human Racing Nick Kershaw #9, Sparkle in the Rain Simple Minds 10, Off the Wall by Michael Jackson, which at the time was 5 years old, is at #11. The Crossing by Big Country is at #12, Keep Moving by Madness 13, Under Blood Red Sky U2 14, 1984 Van Halen 15. I mean, they are 15 absolutely massive albums in that chart. And the whole album chart is literally full of big records. Going Down, No Parlay by Paul Young, Swoon by Peter Pab Sprout, the Gilmore album. Now That's What I Call Music, the first one, is still in the album charts, #23. Street Sounds, Edition 8, they were big compilations of sort of hip-hoppy stuff that you know, kind of defined that era, really. Genesis' self-titled album, the one with Mum and That's All, is at #30. Seven and Ragged Tiger follows it by Duran. Quick Step and Sidekick by Thompson Twins after that. Flat Earth by Thomas Dolby had fallen down a bit. But yeah, Queen's Greatest Hits was #34. It'd come up from #43. Then you know, you've got things like War by U2, Slide It In by Whitesnake. You know, just loads of really big records, and they were all selling in huge quantities. And while we're looking at the charts, we'll just look at the music video chart, and this is really interesting because heavy metal is definitely a big seller on video at this time, because Whitesnake have a #1 video, and they also have the #4 video. In between them is Toy and Olivia Newton-John. But then you've got Judas Priest, you've got you've got Jimi Hendrix, you've got the Stranglers, you've got Saxon, you've got Bauhaus, you've got The Fall, you know, Earth, Wind and Fire, Meatloaf. You know, rock metal is kind of, you know, big on it. I mean, you have got like the film Flashdance, you have got a Kate Bush video in there, but it's mostly kind of rock and, you know, guitar-based music that's doing the numbers on the music videos. Okay, well, we're now into the 4th week of March 1983. There's actually 5 weeks in this month. And singles-wise, there's some real big numbers that get released in this week. You Take Me Up by the Thompson Twins enters at #13. PYT from Michael Jackson is #20. Now, this is the last single that gets released from the Thriller album. There's only about 2 songs on Thriller that weren't singles, but this was the last one. And Ain't Nobody by Rufus and Chaka Khan, that entered the charts at 37. Now, a band you may have heard of called the Beatles, they actually had a record enter the charts in this week, and it was have been the then 20th anniversary version of Can't Buy Me Love. So that entered the charts 53. 71, we had TV Dinners by ZZ Top. 72, we had I Scare Myself by Thomas Dolby, which is probably one of my favourite Thomas Dolby songs. And for the prog fans, at 92, Victim of Circumstance by Barclay James Harvest entered the charts. As for albums, well, we had the Last Night in Sodom by Soft Cell, their last ever album that came out, or last ever album until they reformed, that came out entered at number 13. The self-titled album by the Icicle Works entered at number 24. King Crimson's Three of a Perfect Pair entered the charts, number 30, a bit of prog there. And Climate of Hunter by Scott Walker entered the charts at number 40. So plenty of stuff out that week. Now, if you'd watched the Tube, you'd have seen Scott Walker, Bo Diddley, Reflex, and the Dance Society. So, you know, you had blues, you had the avant-garde from Scott Walker, you had pure pop from Reflex, and a bit of goth from the Dance Society. Whereas on Whistle Test, as I said, they're doing things about instruments, and they were talking about guitars on this one. And there's a lovely interview where David Hepworth's talking to Rich Thompson about guitars and whether, you know, how he plays and styles and things. And then Midge Yours also when they're talking about the Roland guitar synthesizer.
A fairly normal basic guitar. You can...
So now what happens when we go through the synthesizer?
Something good, I hope. You end up with a string section. Or... Hold on, you just move your hands, and then reconnect the guitar again, bring in the guitar and play over it.
So you could sound like 3 or 4 guitars at once there, really.
Yes, you can do.
And also on that edition, there was some live footage from John Hyatt and Tim Pope's talking about some videos and about a video he was making that he was thinking of putting out as a single with lots of other people in it. Whether that came or not, I don't know. And there's also a great version of Wall of Death by Rich Thompson on this episode, which is a great song from a great album. Now, if you watch York's Roadshow, you would have seen Propaganda on there, a feature about shoplifting, interview with Kajagoogoo's Nick Beggs, and he's there playing the Chapman stick, which is like a really fancy, interesting bass guitar. There's also a live set from Depeche Mode and David Essex. And also on this week, Bananarama were on Pebble Mill at 1. Now, the last week of March, we had not much in the way of releases because it's like, you know, it's like the first, like the month ended like on a Friday. So on the Tube, you got to see David Gilmour and Depeche Mode. And there's also a nice long feature about Island Records. You can find that on YouTube. It's well worth watching. And on Whistle Test, there was a live clip from Echo and the Bunnymen. We had a really interesting interview with a guy called Stuart Hartley, who worked for HMV. And he's talking about how back catalogue sales were still, their albums still selling. And he kind of talked about certain bands and albums and whether they would be successful in the future.
Which albums do you think, we haven't counted in the chart the stuff that came out in the last 4 years, which things have come out recently that do you think will be bestsellers in the future?
That's very, very difficult to say, but I think if you named 2 or 3, then Duran Duran, Rio, Michael Jackson, Thriller, Culture Club, Kissing to be Clever, I think they'll probably stand the test of time.
Well, we shall see. Thanks a lot.
And these are the albums that were the big sellers in 1984. And as you can see, things like Dark Side of the Moon, Rumours, Ziggy Stardust, Hotel California, Tubular Bells. I mean, all these records are still absolutely massive sellers today. Obviously, there's probably less people buying things like Abraxas by Santana or Ian Dury, but things like Saturday Night Fever are certainly continuous sellers, as are albums like Transformer by Lou Reed. I think Bruce Springsteen's back catalogue always sells. Layla, I mean, how many copies of that has sold over the years? And then it finished with a clip of Blancmange from the Sight and Sound and Concert programme that was going out the following night. And that is a particularly excellent live concert.
So please welcome, for the last of this current series on stage, in sight, in sound, and in concert, Mr. Blancmange! I knew you did!
And lastly, on the Oxford Roadshow, you had... it was live from the Xenon nightclub, and you had an interview with Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and they also did a like sort of part live, part mime performance at the end. You had the Water Boys, Thomas Dolby was on there, Nick Hayward was on there, Pete Burns was on there, Phil Fearon was on there. So, you know, it's good lineup of music on that episode. And so then we got the last 2 record mirrors to have a thumb through. Susie and the Banshees on one of them, and Roy from Culture Club on the other. Now look at this. If you bought this, you could have got 2 money off vouchers, 25p off getting 2 chrome cassettes from Boots. So, you know, it's quite a saving, 25p. And Memorex chrome tapes they are. So obviously they never got used. Well, you'd be lucky to find any chrome tapes now for under about 10 quid. It's interesting to see that Barclay James Harvest took out a full page advert for their latest single, and it came out on 7-inch, 12-inch and shaped picture disc. Now, they certainly were not a big band in the UK in the 80s and 90s, but in Europe they were huge and they sold a huge amount of records. And I remember a friend of mine in the 90s, he worked for a record label or distribution company called Vinyl Japan, and I think one of their biggest sellers was Barclay James Harvest. So it's interesting to note that, you know, they might not have been a big pop band, but they were certainly still shifting huge amount of records, and probably still do to this day. So there we've got a feature with a photo of Susie and Steve Severin there, and on the next page we've got is that China Cry? Oh, it's the Bluebells. So they must have been doing Young at Heart, or getting ready to do Young at Heart and having a hit with that. Again, there's Green Gartside from Scritti Politti. He was doing a lot of press at the time because he'd just split up the main band and decided to do something new, which ultimately became the Cupid and Psychic 85 album. Now let's have a look at the letters. Here's a good one from the letters page. What the hell is up with Mike Reid? Does he think he's some sort of god? The best idea would be to ban him and not relax. From someone called Robert Smith, Charlotte Sometimes. So, and correspondence on Frankie Goes to Hollywood is now closed. Next week, the Jim Reid backlash. Jim Reid, not Jesus and Mary Chain, but the writer for Record Mirror. So, yeah, all the topics of the day were covered in this issue. Now, the Gary Crowley feature is interesting because he's talking about a new show on Channel 4 that he's co-presenting called Ears Say. Now, I think I kind of remember this, and I'm pretty sure that's the show I first saw Pride in the Name of Love by U2. But he's got it co-presented with Nicky Horn, who is obviously one of the great rock presenters of all time, and Leslie Ann Jones, who's kind of more known now as a writer. She's been writing lots of books, and she's recently written a book about the Rolling Stones. But on this show, they've got the Smiths, they've got the Style Council, Marilyn, and hopefully Terry Thomas. So there you go, and they're going to show the special AKA Nelson Mandela video. So yeah, Ears Say, I definitely remember that show as being pretty decent, and I'll try and look for a few clips on YouTube.
Well look, you've got 4 records to choose from. Out of interest, which one would you like to take home? If you want to, that is.
Terry.
Terry Wells. Yeah. All right, you can have that one. Now listen, do you spend a lot of money on videos? I know you've got a video, haven't you?
Yeah.
Well, you may be interested to know there's a great new video out this week.
Now, if we look at the singles review, they're done this week by Chrissy Boy and Lee from Madness, and it's interesting. There's a few singles here actually that I didn't mention in my releases, probably because they hadn't actually entered the charts at that point. But one is Spear of Destiny's Liberator, again classic song of the era. And Chris says, I like it. Their last single I think has got plenty of energy, and this is well produced as well. And Lee Thompson says, I think this is really very good compared to most of the other records we've heard today. It's brilliant. I think it's a top 5 hit. This is one for the kids. Well, Liberator is a brilliant song. But then they go to Killing Joke's 80s. Now, if you don't know this song, it's the song that Nirvana nicked the riff off for Come As You Are. So if you don't know 80s, you might know Come As You Are. But it's a great song. They said, Lee Thompson says, before disc spins, living in the 80s, I have to push, I have to struggle is what it will sound like. And Chrissy Boy says, I think they did this song on the tube, not very good. Well, it's a shame because I think it's a great song. And yeah, and there's a few other interesting songs that get mentioned on here, such as Nas Nomad and the Nightmares. Now, I think that was a pseudonym for the Damned, but I can't remember. But they seem to like it, even though they don't know who the band is. And here we got Phil Collins Against the Odds, Take a Look at Me Now. Well, I mean, that's just an absolutely massive song. and they've said, I see the B-side co-written by Mike Rutherford, so Genesis are making a good old touch out of this film. This is the title track. It sounds very American. And Lee Thompson says, I've heard this before in America. I don't like it there, and I don't like it here. It will probably go very well with the film. It builds up nicely. I like the cover. That moves me. And they're reviewing the Cure, the Caterpillar, and Chrissy Boy says Robert Smith looks like Terry Hall. Well, that's true. They did look very similar at one point, and seems to be all about 3 groups. I would say he's spreading himself a bit thin. I don't think much about the Cure. I like Love Cats. I thought that was great, but I don't think there's much of this. It sounds something like playing the spoons in the background, which is I like good spoon playing. Lee Thompson says the sing's a bit forced, isn't it? I don't think they'll be big for long with this. And of course, time has shown that the Cure are probably the biggest British alternative band. Well, there you have it. You know, a great selection of music from this month in 1984. Now, I'm not 100% sure when it was released, so I'm just going to give kudos to this, the Roland Rat cassette of the album, because, you know, it's probably the defining album of the 80s. I don't think there's a record as classic as this. And, you know, with a song like Pink Bucket Reggae or Leaks Are Wonderful, Leaks Are Nice, sung by Errol the Amster, you know, you're not going to get better than this. And there's not many people that have this album. And, you know, if I can just show you inside, it actually came with a cut-out mobile. So you could cut these things out and hang them from your lampshade. And probably the greatest poster of any record ever released. I mean, that is just absolutely amazing. I mean, you know, you'd see that in an art gallery now, and you'd easily pay, I don't know, £20,000 for that. And this is seriously the rarest record in my collection. I don't think there's anything that's as valuable as this. I mean, you could offer me £20,000 for this record, and I wouldn't sell it because it is just so important in the history of music. So with that, I will bid you farewell. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one. Yeah!